The train system in the UK, it's not great, is it?
Well, I mean, everyone has different views, but from my point of view, the kind of funny thing is I get to travel a lot around Europe and see many other sort of rail networks, and I actually think the UK network's pretty fantastic.
One thing, we talked about reliability or sometimes the unreliability of the train network. Another thing is the price. You can't always buy super advanced tickets because business leaders, for example, need to come from Manchester down to London of a day, 2 days notice, and they're looking at a couple £100, £300, £400 sometimes for a single ticket, which is absolutely outrageous. What can Trainline do? Do you have any powers about setting the prices? Because when they're complaining on social media, they're screenshotting the Trainline app and it's your name next to a ridiculous price. For this, that you're a self-confessed train geek. Is that true?
Yeah, so the kind of where that comes from is much earlier on in my life when I was sort of a kid. I was moving between my mum's and my dad's house, and so every other week we would go down from Peterborough to King's Cross, and I sort of was really into the whole train experience, and don't tell anyone, right? But I used to sort of write down the numbers of the trains and kind of do that. Now, I think that has led me to always be into rail and understanding rail and what that looks like and kind of how it works. So the opportunity to come and work at Trainline and kind of combine something I was kind of really into around rail, I kind of like the travel of being with people and on rail and the way it kind of connects the country and now Europe together with my kind of previous professional experience in tech was just a too good opportunity to miss.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Boardroom Uncovered, powered by City AM. My name's Jon Robinson, City AM's UK editor, and my guest for this edition is the CEO of Trainline, Jody Ford. Ford took on the top job full-time in 2021 on the back of holding senior positions at the likes of Moonpig and eBay. The FTSE 250 company enjoyed rising sales and profits in 2024, but announced plans to cut its workforce in a bid to make around £12 million in savings. But how does Trainline plan to continue growing in the UK while being dependent on Britain's unreliable train infrastructure? Without any further delay, let's dive in. Jody, thank you very much for coming on Boardroom Uncovered.
Thank you for having me here.
I suppose we'd better jump into it. The train system in the UK, it's not great, is it?
Well, I mean, everyone has different views, but from my point of view, the kind of funny thing is I get to travel a lot around Europe and see many other sort of rail networks, and I actually think the UK network's pretty fantastic. I think there's been some challenges over the last couple of years, which really come out the back of COVID, where they weren't able to sort of train up enough drivers, and so we kind of hit this spot without enough drivers ready to go. And I feel like we've kind of worked through that. And then there's obviously been some kind of industrial action. And you have to remember that the 20 years prior to that, there wasn't any industrial action, and the railway actually doubled in size and actually very effective for most people. But now and again, of course, there's challenges. And I think that's at Trainline what we're here to do, is to try and support you when there are challenges, help you through those disruptions and help you get to where you're getting to with as much information as possible and whenever possible on time.
Well, the narrative constantly is cancellations, delays, unreliability. And I know that it's not ultimately Trainline's responsibility, but you are the gatekeepers to all of that information. It's where the majority of people buy the tickets, look at the information. And I see on social media all the time, screenshots of people's phones of cancellation after cancellation. It's from the Trainline app. Do you feel, as the CEO of Trainline, a bit of responsibility about that?
Well, I guess where we're at from our point of view is our job is to help customers in whatever way we can, right? So making that information available wherever we can, helping them through that, making them aware of their options. And then when things do go wrong, as kind of easily as possible, helping get the refunds or the delay repay or whatever it might be they're due. That's where I see my responsibility. And I think we've continued to innovate in that space. And when you look at what we did during COVID, where there were so many cancellations, we massively restructured restructured our kind of customer services processes and our refund to just whenever possible make it as easy as it is. And I get that there'll always be stuff on social media, and I actually got a surprising number of emails of people actually saying thank you for making that so easy. And for all those people who do have challenges, and I do get there are challenges, we have a lot of very, very happy customers. And I think that's the thing people think about Trainline. It is the kind of company, the brand they trust to help them navigate rail, whether there's disruption or to find the very best value.
It is so frustrating, isn't it, when there's cancellation after cancellation. You're relying on the rail network for getting to work, and having that reliability is so important. It must be hitting Trainline's reputation to a certain extent, because so much of that is outside of your control, right? You're not running the trains, you're not responsible for the infrastructure, but you're selling the tickets, you're giving the information. Does it impact Trainline's reputation at all? Is that a risk?
That's not how customers talk to us. I think what they do is they look at Trainline to see how we can make it as easy as possible to navigate the rail network. There's a lot of, I've commuted for the last, probably 10 years from St Albans down to London, and genuinely, I can count on maybe like 3 hands, like the number of times I've really been more than a few minutes delayed. So there'll always be these sort of points in the network or some challenges there. But I think for the vast majority of people, they commute and it actually works really pretty well. In those cases, it's our job to help them wherever we can and sort of work and feedback information into the train operating companies where we can help them think through ways to solve some of those problems.
Of course, different areas of the UK have different issues. You mentioned about St Albans to London.
Yeah.
That's a more reliable line than the northern lines in the northwest, Yorkshire, northeast, Transpennine Express. These companies have had issues for years now. How is Trainline dealing with that unreliability and that difference between if you're living in the north to living in the south?
Sure. And in the end, I think you come back to kind of issues on investment levels, and that kind of comes back down to a government question. If I look at the line I took up to this morning here, that was a great service and it moved very fast. And I think everyone would have said the journey was excellent, much better than taking the car, for example. And as a reminder, it'd be like a third of the carbon footprint. So there's lots of good reasons around rail. I think with some of the regional services, in the end, it comes down to the level of investment, and that's a question in the end for the government almost rather than the rail industry of how much are you prepared to subsidise particular regional networks. And that's the same question, honestly, throughout the whole of Europe, and you can have that about almost any form of transportation. How many roads should we build? What airport structures should we have? And those are the questions that, in the end, the government have to answer. It's Trainline's job is to sell tickets and to help people on the journeys once they take them.
And if the government called you up, Keir called you up and said, Jody, we need you, we want you to be the new transport minister for rail. What's in your inbox? What are you doing? What's your plan? How are you going to improve the UK rail network?
So look, that's my job is very much to create basically Europe's best app to help people buy the tickets, find the value, and to, when there are disruptions, support them there. It's way beyond me to tell you how Keir or Starmer should invest in rail. I obviously believe rail is a really important part of the country's infrastructure and something that we could continue to invest in. And I see what that means for customers, and I see what that means in terms of reducing carbon. And there's obviously opportunities, and we'd be very pro-investment, and whether that's around HS2 or generally improving services, I think those are great opportunities. And beyond that, I guess the other thing we really like, and we'll perhaps end up talking a bit about it, is in Europe we see the value of kind of competition on some of those high-speed lines. And I think there's a service that many people will be aware of, Lumo, that runs from London to Edinburgh and has really brought a different kind of travel experience. So it's the sort of EasyJet or Ryanair of rail. And I think giving people choice, making it cheaper for people to travel is a great way of attracting people into rail. And I think looking at more what they call open access players, operators into other parts of the network is something I would certainly be encouraging any government to be looking at. And there are plans to run on other lines, and I think that's a way to, I think competitions wherever it's possible and sort of makes sense from a infrastructure point of view is something to be embraced. And so that would be kind of one area I'd look at.
One thing, we talked about reliability or sometimes the unreliability of the train network. Another thing is the price. you can't always buy super advanced tickets because business leaders, for example, need to come from Manchester down to London of a day, 2 days notice, and they're looking at a couple £100, 300, £400 sometimes for a single ticket, which is absolutely outrageous. What can Trainline do? Do you have any powers about setting the prices? Because when they're complaining on social media, they're screenshotting the Trainline app and it's your name next to a ridiculous price.
So look, we don't have any powers as it relates to the headline price of train tickets, as you'd expect. What we do, I think, a really good job of is helping customers find the best prices, and if they are able to book in advance. And I think it's like all form of transport and many other type of goods. If you buy something at the last minute and going at peak times, you are going to pay often a significantly higher price, whether that's your Uber surge price or whether that's a plane ticket, and it's the same for trains. I think if you're able to buy a few days in advance, there are really good prices to be had. A large part of the country, be surprised how many rail cards that people access to if you're traveling with a family or with another individual, or you're a senior or a young person. There's just lots of different rail cards which often take 30% or more off the fare, which is a great way. And then some kind of, we innovate wherever possible, and you may have experienced Split Safe, which is a sort of what we saw there, where customers were queuing up in stations to effectively buy 2 tickets and to put them together to make it cheaper, to almost get half of the ticket to be off peak. And we've sort of brought that out to everybody, and that's been another way that customers are able to effectively save money by travelling on the trains and using the Trainline app.
Of course, you're not a train company, you're a tech business. You've not come from a sort of tech background. You must have had to learn quite a lot over your career about what goes into the back end of an app to make sure that it's working all the time and there's the updates constantly about what's going on across the network. That must be incredibly complicated.
So, look, there's a lot that goes into any app, whatever you're doing. It could be a lot of transactions. It could be that you need real-time information. We work with the rail network to understand the updates of how trains are performing and whether they might be on time or late. And increasingly, we're looking at things around the location of the individual to help kind of add to that and be able to guide them and look at the ways that we can use that data. For example, if you are, if you're in a kind of congested area and you're actually trying to work out what train you're on, especially if there's a lot of regional trains, there's now an option in there that says find my train, and actually we look at your location, we look at your movement and actually tell you which train you're on, so you can understand, well, hang on, where does it stop? Is it on time? What platform is it going to arrive at? And you can begin to think about the connections you've got. So yes, we're always looking at how we can improve and innovate, and we work with the industry to bring those things in. We have kind of over 500 engineers and increasingly data scientists who do that to bring the innovation to customers on Trainline.
Of course, it's not just a UK company, it's European as well. Tell me about the expansion across the continent and how important that is to the company.
So hugely important to the company, and that's very much one of the reasons I sort of got excited to take the role sort of just over 4 years ago now. And really what's going on there is Trainline has built this great position supporting so many customers in the UK, and we've developed this app and this platform, and we said, well, hang on a moment, we can do the same across Europe. And so there was an acquisition actually prior to my arrival, prior to the IPO, of a company called Captain Train in France, which kind of gave us a bridgehead into France and into Europe. But since around 4 years ago, there was new legislation from Brussels that said that domestic markets need to offer competition, allow competition to their incumbent rail operator. And so what's happened is you've got companies, a bit like Lumo going to Edinburgh from London, you've got these companies coming in. And if we take Spain, for example, there are now 4 different services that run from Madrid to Barcelona. And now, if you think about a customer going, well, which train should I take? What time? And there might be 40, 50 trains. What time of day? And then all of the prices off all of those different operators. And then you go, well, hang on, can I look at 3 or 4 different apps so I have to get a pencil out? Or you can use Trainline and put all of those in one place. And that's meant that we're really helping customers there. And recently, we just talked about some of our results. We're now selling with about 16% of all the tickets between Madrid and Valencia. And that's having sold 0% only like 2.5 years ago. So it's a super exciting market for us.
Yeah. And how does the European rail network compare to the UK? You said earlier it was fantastic. I'm not quite sure I believe you when you say that.
So I think there's a spectrum here. I think if you compared us to Germany, Deutsche Bahn, you really would say I believe that the UK network is very strong compared to the German network. There's, I think we all found this out. The news stories that came out of the European football competition in Germany, a lot of people were trying to get around, and there's some stat. I think it's something like maybe 1 in 5 trains in Germany don't reach their destination. I mean, it really is. It's not maybe what you imagine, but it's truly difficult. Even there was an article recently in The Economist that talked about how the Swiss border is often closed to German trains because they slow the whole thing down. So that's sort of one extreme. I think what's been really exciting is to see the investment in high speed, and that's something. Obviously, we have the high-speed rail that goes down towards Paris and high-speed 1, and there's been a lot of discussion about high-speed 2. But in Spain, there is now a kind of really developed high-speed network throughout the country, and likewise in France and in Italy. And that creates capacity, which is really important. It's partly about the speed, partly about the ability to run sort of regional trains, commuter trains, fast trains, freight, and that's often what they have done well in some of those European markets.
Do you think there's anything from Europe that the UK rail network can learn from?
I think there's things that everyone can learn in many different directions. Actually, a large part of Europe has looked towards the UK over the last 20 years because of the increase in volume. This point about having doubled the number of passengers is actually a huge achievement for the UK rail network. Doesn't mean there aren't things that can't be improved. I think when you look at the European network, I think this idea of running kind of high capacity fast trains between cities and really driving substitution from air is great, and also the way often they do very good connections with the airports and other sort of transport hubs is something that over time in the big infrastructure projects we could look at.
Obviously in the last few years HS2 has never been far from the headlines. Previous Conservative governments did cancel that high-speed element between Birmingham and Manchester. Still going ahead with. There's a little bit of uncertainty about where it's going to go actually into Euston. What's your view on HS2? A lot of people in the north would say, well, we want reliable trains before we want to get to London a little bit quicker. What's your view?
So I think the arguments around HS2 often were, it's this previous point around capacity. When you speak to industry experts, and I'm really not one in terms of where we should be building our rail tracks, it's this point about driving more capacity and being able to carry more passengers. And then to the earlier point, you're able to have different services, and it comes back to being able to offer kind of really great value at that point. So I'm a big believer that we should invest in the high-speed infrastructure. I'm probably not the right person of exactly what the trade-offs are in any given part of the country around that, but very pro high-speed rail.
Thank you to our sponsor Blackboard, a global technology company powering social good across the world. Blackboard's corporate impact team empowers purpose-led organisations to drive change in their communities.
Jody, well, thank you for joining the Blackboard sponsored section of Boardroom Uncovered. First question really is, we're seeing a lot of employees look to choose their employer based on their values, and a lot of employees are staying within an organisation based on the activity of CSR. But what does CSR mean to you as a leader?
Well, for us, it's actually core to our purpose. And really the thing we talk about all the time within the company is really the sustainability part of that, and the vision of getting people to travel by rail, which, by the way, is like 1/3 of the carbon emissions of car and 1/7 of air. And what we found is that really attracts talent. I think many people have felt like they weren't part of the problem historically, but they want to be part of the solution, and Trainline is very much seen like it's part of the solution, and people come to us so that they can feel like they are doing their bit to get people onto rail and help the environment.
Trainline, of course, had a very successful 2024. Sales and profits up. It comes to the cost, though. You've recently announced some job losses. What impact does that have on you as the CEO? You've got to make that ultimate decision that's going to happen. Is that incredibly difficult for you to deal with?
So look, as you say, it was a successful year, and there are always going to be moments where you have to sort of restructure a business or look at kind of, I sort of say in this one, a kind of refining where our resource was there. And I think as it relates, those things are always difficult. I mean, they're a natural part of business, and you go through them from time to time, and you hope they don't happen very often.
But it's setting you up, really, you would argue, for 2025 and growth onwards. What are your plans for 2025 and onwards?
So it comes back a lot to Europe. So I think when we look at the countries we want to move into, and we've got a really great brand already in Spain, Italy, and France. Spain, we've seen huge growth over the last 3 years because of this competition. And we want to, what we call a kind of aggregation, the ability to help customers choose from all of these different services, which is the best one to take. So we'll keep investing in Spain, and we're building our brand there. So whether that's around sponsoring, recently sponsoring Real Betis, a football team in Seville, because there's new train services going down there, or doing station takeovers to really bring to life this idea, because Spanish consumers don't really use these kind of rail apps. They just use the historic one, and so we're going to continue to bring that to life. And then over the next year, at some point, we will see more entrance into the Italian market, and so we have a great brand there. A lot of customers already use us, but we think that's the opportunity where it will sort of supercharge the Italian market, and so we'll continue to invest there. And then in France, whilst the whole market won't yet become competitive, that'll happen over the next 3 or 4 years, we increasingly see competition on the routes down to Lyon, and Paris, Marseille, where they're sort of routes number 1 and number 3 in France. And with that competition, we'll be investing in bringing that kind of aggregated experience, helping customers, but also bringing our brand to life, investing in our brand there.
You're going up against established players in those countries as well. What are you doing to differentiate yourself and trying to win over those customers?
Yeah, so I mean, already over the last year, we became the number 1 rail app in Europe. We have probably about twice the size in terms of app downloads and usage than someone like SNCF. So we have the scale, and we continue to innovate on our product in ways, having so many customers in the UK allows us to be in a position where we can kind of export our tech to Europe, and that gives us real strength and real opportunity. And then when you think about any one of those markets, it is real sort of what we refer to as like product market fit, right? There's real differentiation in the fact that we have all of these different players in one app, in a way that others will just be talking about their own trains. And that really distinguishes us in the mind of customers.
I read something where I was doing research for this, that you're a self-confessed train geek. Is that true?
Yeah, so the kind of where that comes from is much earlier on in my life, when I was sort of a kid, I was moving between my mum's and my dad's house. And so every other week we would go down from Peterborough to King's Cross. And I sort of was really into the whole train experience, and don't tell anyone, right? But I used to sort of write down the numbers of the trains and kind of do that. Now, I think that has led me to always be into rail and understanding rail and what that looks like and kind of how it works. So the opportunity to come and work at Trainline and kind of combine something I was kind of really into around rail, and just I kind of like the travel of being with people and on rail, and the way it kind of connects the country and now Europe together, with my kind of previous professional experience in tech, was just a too good opportunity to miss.
So this is a dream job then when it came up?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever want to go into the rail network itself?
That wasn't something I thought about when I was younger. I was kind of more the kind of shiny objects around kind of mobile telcos were the things when I was sort of probably as a student. I was kind of excited back then, but now I get to kind of combine them together.
Tell me about growing up then. Did you always think that you want to go into a business career, or were there other avenues that were open to you growing up?
It was always business. I was always really interested. I didn't know what part of business, and sort of the later on you get, the more you begin to understand what's there. But I was very clear it was going to be something in business. I think I kind of was interested in computers very early on. I had probably remember, but the ZX81, which was that very first tiny Sinclair computer that you sort of coded programs on, and that was probably the only time I've ever coded in my life. But there was a game that was like this little cricket game I sort of coded in, having read that, and I just thought I want to do something with computers. I had no idea what they were going to become, but computers and business were the way I saw it.
So tell me how you got onto that first rung of the ladder.
So at university, I applied to a lot of different places, and did an internship as an auditor, and thought actually I don't think pure accountancy is for me. And then I sort of realised there was this graduate course which was actually consulting in various kind of companies, but combined with a sort of finance qualification or finance background, and that seemed like a pretty good, healthy first step. And so I took that as my first job. And then while I was there, I was always trying to angle into the telco division of that area, and for whatever reason it never really worked out. And then it was the kind of heyday of mobiles had just come out, there was GPRS technology, and they were bidding on the 3G licenses, and Orange, again a brand that's left the UK, is still around Europe, was really changing the way people thought about technology, was making it human and engaging. And I thought, well, I'd love to work at Orange, and so I saw this job and applied there, and ended up getting ended up my second job, but at Orange, in my sort of dream area of telco.
Yeah, tell me about your experience at Orange. What did you do? And you rise the ranks, and what happened?
So it was a great time to be there. I was sort of in a strategy team that worked on all sorts of different things through that period. Some of them were really looking for the first time at there was a lot of talk about data, but no one really knew what data meant. People were just making phone calls, and back then sending text messages, but it became very clear that there was going to be a lot of interest in what was called person to person. And now I didn't go away and invent WhatsApp or anything like that, but it became very clear that was the future. And we talked a lot about Orange. And back in those days, it seemed like the Vodafones and the Oranges were going to win this, sort of create these wall gardens, and we spent a lot of time talking about that. And then we actually went through what was then the Orange IPO, and so we sort of brought that to life for investors and for consumers, really predicting what, one of the years we looked at was 2020, which obviously we've now passed, but we were talking about people being able to stream football matches or films or bet on games or communicate with others. And at the time it seemed slightly hyperbolic, but now it's all come true. And so kind of being involved in things like that were always very interesting.
Yeah, and then you moved on to eBay.
Yeah, I took a bit of a time out and went to business school for a year. Having worked with a few people, I thought actually this would be a great moment, late 20s, go and spend a year out of industry. And that was a fantastic experience. I actually studied in France with people from all over the world. I mean, less than 10% of the course were British. And so that was my first chance to really work just with a really international crowd. And then I, after that, went and did effectively like a 6-month internship at eBay. And this was the first time I was like, oh, wow, this is actually what I want to do. It's the first time I worked in what was then a web company. I saw this kind of connection between buyers and sellers and the idea of a marketplace, which is something you'd sort of thought about as through economics and other things, but I'd never actually seen what it really looked like. And I did that for 6 months. I had already committed to a consultancy job back in London, but as soon as I got back, I was like, okay, I need to find a way back to eBay. And about 2 years later, I took my first job at eBay, running eBay Motors in the UK.
And you rose up the ranks there, but tell me about getting those ever higher positions. Did you ever feel imposter syndrome at any point? Did you ever feel uncomfortable? Or did you feel that every promotion was something that you were excited to take on and you felt comfortable pretty quickly?
I mean, I can't speak for other people, but I think there's always those moments when you get these new roles where you're trying to work out how you're going to do it, and kind of making it up till you get it right. I mean, I think that's life, right? And you want that position, but then you arrive. And so I remember getting my first job at eBay, running eBay Motors, and I suddenly had people calling me officially boss, and I was like, wow, I'm actually responsible for them and their career, and that was like okay, I've got to think about what this means, and not just for me, but for them, and work through that. And then as those teams get bigger, you realize there's not just your immediate team, but there's people beyond them in their teams that you need to provide a vision for, engage with them, and help them think through their career ambitions. And that's something that's just always been very passionate about. How can you develop people? And it's super rewarding to see them grow and then do the roles and grow to do the next role and become the manager or the director. So every point, I think, as those things happen, the first time I was standing up in front of maybe 400 or 500 eBay sellers, and they're looking at me going, well, you're kind of responsible for this platform and helping us sell in their personal livelihoods. You realize that's a real responsibility on you, and it's not just about you, it's about them and the broader sort of ecosystem at eBay.
How do you deal with that responsibility? You're in obviously a top position now. You've got more responsibility than you did at eBay. How do you deal with that?
So I think time is, as ever, just a way to get comfortable with doing things, and things that looked very sort of challenging or look like a huge responsibility when you look back 10 years or 15 years, you've kind of got comfortable with that. And I think you have to sort of take seriously your role and the people around you, but you also have to find ways that you're able to switch off when you get home or at the weekend, and try and, whenever possible, bring those things in balance. That's not always possible, but whenever you can, being able to reset, be present for your family, and having other interests, those things, I think, are the sort of counterweights to what can be a lot of responsibility.
And you first became a CEO at Moonpig. When you got that role, did you feel that you'd achieved a career ambition, a long career ambition, or was it something that was never particularly the aim, or you just sort of taking the opportunity when it came along?
So that was interesting. I was actually based out in California. I was working for eBay in Silicon Valley, which was an amazing experience to sort of spend time there. And one of my old sort of bosses called up and said, "Hey, Jody, I've got this really great role at Moonpig. What do you think?" And so I kind of went and met the team there and spent time with him and understood the business. I was like, actually, this is the right role, and it feels like it's scary but not too scary is probably the way to put it. And so having kind of come back and then stepped up there, it was another moment, a bit like that first moment, having a team who report to you, suddenly standing up and realizing there wasn't a divisional senior vice president above me or someone. When things went wrong, there was no one to sort of call. That is definitely a moment. And honestly, I think that took a year or two to really get kind of comfortable with. And there's moments of, just sheer joy, but there's moments where, obviously things go wrong or there's stress or you don't hit your numbers and you realize it's you. And that did take time to get used to. And then to this question, I don't think I was thinking, when am I going to become a CEO? It just felt like it sort of just evolved as a lot of roles appear in front and you're like, okay, this seems like a very sensible next step. It's not been the case that I've looked up and said, this is the thing I need to get to.
So how did it come about that you got this current job that you're in at the moment? Did they come to you? Did you apply? Tell me about that process.
So I actually concluded in the previous role at Moonpig and took some time out. I was just like, I have an opportunity to spend best part of a year with my family, and these opportunities roll around very rarely. So I thought, let's really spend some time, and maybe we'll travel and do all these exciting things. I'd made a commitment. My wife is kind of half Spanish, and I was like, I'm going to really get good at the Spanish, and I got a little bit better, but I definitely get really good. And then kind of COVID struck halfway through that time period, which just changed everything for obviously a lot of people. And I knew the Trainline business well. I actually knew a number of people who worked there, and there was a new chairman there, and I knew the CEO well. And so at that point, it became a sort of really interesting conversation about joining and looking at what that role could become in the future. And I think the other part of this is there's, if you're based in London and want to be based in London and you want to work in a tech business, there's only a handful of really what I'd call scaled businesses, and I was pretty clear on that. And Trainline was really, it recently IPO'd. It had I thought, a really great growth trajectory ahead of it, but clearly was in the middle of COVID, and it was a challenging time. And I sort of had a number of conversations, and inside this was the one that I thought was going to be the kind of one I wanted to make the bet on and be involved with.
And talk to me about your leadership style. If I had a Trainline employee here and asked them what they were like, what you're like as a leader, what would you hope that they would say? What do you think that they would say?
They might be two different things, but I'd hope, I guess, that they would say, I think a kind of really human element to leadership and sort of, in the end, leadership's about people, right? It's not really about spreadsheets and plans. They're all obviously part of it, but how can you kind of engage and inspire and lead people towards something. So I sort of a human piece coupled with, I think, a reasonably high energy engagement in, frankly, whatever's going on, whether that's about how we launch a new app feature or how we change marketing or promote our Spanish service. Like, those are things that I get very energized about, and hopefully that energy kind of carries through.
Looking back over your career, you've done several different jobs working for high-profile companies. Is there a success that stands out to you that you're particularly proud of?
I mean, right now, when I look at what's going on in Spain, I'm really proud of what the team have achieved there. I think to go from this place of being almost no one's heard of us to being, in many cases, selling the very first ticket for these new operators that have launched in that market, and to see the growth that we sort of achieved there is, I'm really proud of that, and sort of delighted for the team and what they've achieved. And it's kind of rare you get those things in such kind of clean isolation, and it feels like we're just at the start of something really big here. So that would probably be Spain.
And no career is without its blemishes, of course. You'll have had your challenges over your time in business so far. Is there a particular incident, a failure maybe, that stands out to you that you think I could have done better in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, right? I think the challenge part, I think coming in to be into Trainline, and then ultimately I took over as CEO within that period, and it was COVID, and we couldn't have everyone in the building. And whilst I could, talk and get to know my immediate sort of team, it was very hard to get a sense of the energy. And there was a lot of people questioning whether this was even the right company to be at. Were we going to survive COVID? Was, maybe a few people were kind of asking that question. And so to give that belief in the future, but have to do it in a way where you couldn't get everyone in a room or even get a kind of group together and meet them, that was really challenging. And that sort of learning of just having unshakable belief in your own sort of expectations and being able to convey that was clearly one. If you want a sort of more clear-cut failure, I guess there was a period when I was at eBay where I was responsible for what's referred to as sort of SEO, the traffic from Google that we naturally got. And the team were creating these really kind of cool new pages that were bringing us a lot of new traffic, and everyone was clapping a lot. But a couple of kind of wise heads said to me, "Are you sure these pages really fit within the overall sort of Google structure? Do you think they're long-term going to work for us, or is there a risk they sort of get dropped down?" And I asked maybe a couple of questions, but I didn't ask enough questions on that. And sure enough, whatever it was, 3-4 months later, they got de-indexed, dropped down, and suddenly eBay had this big drop, and that kind of hit the CEO, and I was suddenly very publicly responsible for a kind of a failure. And I learned a lot through that around how do you sort of take responsibility, but also how do you challenge the people in your team, and how do you listen to the right people who maybe have seen this movie a few more times than you have.
How do you bounce back from a very public failure like that?
In the end, I think you look to the people who believe in you, and I think what really helped there was, my boss at the time and a couple other people just said, "Look, Jody, yes, this is a mistake, and you need to own that. But I believe in you, and there's other things that you've done that have been great, and you will learn and you will get better, and I'm sure you won't make it again." And I was like, "No, for sure I won't." So I think that can be real support, and then you have to sometimes just go down deeper and sort of just turn up and face into it, and kind of just take steps forward. And look, it happens to a lot of people all of the time, right? Like, things are always going wrong, and you have to just keep moving forward.
What more do you want to achieve in your career over the next few years or so? Have you got goals in mind that you want to hit?
So I think, when I think about Trainline, I think there's multiple years ahead of us where, I've talked a little bit about Italy, but France is a huge market, the same size as the UK. I think, the number of different services that are launching there, Trainline has the opportunity to really be the go-to app. And I sort of look, and I think that's something very exciting that I would love to lead towards that. I tend not to think in, to my earlier point, in like big kind of career goals beyond what I'm sort of engaged in at the moment. I guess one of the areas that I'm sort of a professional level and a personal level is any role that I can play in supporting UK tech scale and grow. I think it's so important for this country that we have a really active tech sector and scaled. And I think one of the challenges is that if you look at multiple other sectors over the last few decades, you look at HSBC and Barclays, or you look at Glaxo, or you look at Unilever or BP and Shell, we've had, in these big global industries, we've always had these world beaters. And when you look at tech, unfortunately, we don't have one of those. And I think it's critical when you think about the success of the country that we develop, the talent there in the tech space, but also we create the companies that are worth even like tens of billions or potentially hundreds, never mind companies that are now sort of in the hundreds and beyond billion scale. So any role that I can play in that would be something for the future, I think.
Brilliant, Jody. Thank you very much for coming on Boardroom Uncovered.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.